I will tell you the story of my life.
Who was me? I was a German mathematician and physicist who developed the special and general theories of relativity. In 1921, I won the Nobel Prize for Physics for my explanation of the photoelectric effect. In the following decade, I immigrated to the US after being targeted by the German Nazi Party. My work also had a major impact on the development of atomic energy. In my later years, I focused on unified field theory. With my passion for inquiry, I'm generally considered the most influential physicist of the 20th century. Stay with me and listen to my story.
I was born on March 14, 1879, in Ulm, Württemberg, Germany. I grew up in a secular Jewish family. My father, Hermann Einstein, was a salesman and engineer who, with his brother, founded Elektrotechnische Fabrik J. Einstein & C., a Munich-based company that mass-produced electrical equipment. My mother, the former Pauline Koch, ran the family household. I had one sister, Maja, born 2 years after me.
Hi, that's me.
I attended elementary school at the Leupold Gymnasium in Munich. However, I felt alienated there and I struggled with the institution's rigid pedagogical style. I also had what were considered speech challenges, though I developed a passion for classical music and playing the violin, which would stay with me years later. Most significantly, my youth was marked by deep inquisitiveness and inquiry. Towards the end of the 1880s, Max Talmud, a Polish medical student who sometimes dined with my family, became an informal tutor to me when I was young. Talmud had presented me a children's science text that inspired me to dream about the nature of light. Thus, during my teens, I penned what would be seen as my first major paper, the investigation of the state of ether and magnetic fields. My father relocated the family to Milan, Italy, in the mid-1890s after his business lost out on a major contract. I was left at a relative's boarding house in Munich to complete my schooling at the Leupold Gymnasium. Faced with military duty when I turned of age, I withdrew from classes, using a doctor's note to excuse myself and claim nervous exhaustion.
I was eventually able to gain admission into the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, specifically due to my superb mathematics and physics scores on the entrance exam. I was still required to complete my pre-university education first, and thus attended a high school in Aarau, Switzerland helmed by Jost Winteller. I lived with the schoolmaster's family and fell in love with Winteller's daughter, Marie. I later renounced my German citizenship and became a Swiss citizen at the dawn of the new century. After graduating, I faced major challenges in terms of finding academic positions, having alienated some professors over not attending class more regularly in lieu of studying independently. I eventually found steady work in 1902 after receiving a referral for a clerk position in a Swiss patent office. While working at the patent office, I had the time to further explore ideas that had taken hold during my studies at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and thus cemented my theorems on what would be known as the principle of relativity. In 1905, seen by many as a miracle year for the theorists, I had 4 papers published in the Annalen der Physik, one of the best-known physics journals of the era. 2 focused on the photoelectric effect and Brownian motion. The 2 others, which outlined E equals mc2 and the special theory of relativity, were defining for my career and the course of the study of physics. I married Maliva Marek on January 6, 1903. While attending school in Zurich, I met Marek, a Serbian physics student. I continued to grow closer to Marek, but his parents were strongly against the relationship due to her ethnic background. Nonetheless, I continued to see her, with the 2 developing a correspondence via letters in which I expressed many of my scientific ideas. My father passed away in 1902, and we married shortly thereafter. That same year we had a daughter, Lieserl, who might have been later raised by Marek's relatives or given up for adoption. My daughter's ultimate fate and whereabouts remain a mystery. We had 2 sons, Hans Albert Einstein, who became a well-known hydraulic engineer, and Edward Ted Einstein, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia as a young man. Our marriage would not be a happy one. We divorced in 1919. As part of a settlement, I agreed to give Marek any funds he might receive from possibly winning the Nobel Prize in the future. The same year I married a cousin, Elsa Lowenthal. In 1921, I won the Nobel Prize for Physics for my explanation of the photoelectric effect, since my ideas on relativity were still considered questionable. I wasn't actually given the award until the following year due to a bureaucratic ruling, and during my acceptance speech, I still opted to speak about relativity. In the development of my general theory, I had held on to the belief that the universe was a fixed, static entity, aka a cosmological constant, though my later theories directly contradicted this idea and asserted that the universe could be in a state of flux. As a physicist, I had many discoveries, but I'm perhaps best known for my theory of relativity and the equation E equals mc2, which foreshadowed the development of atomic power and the atomic bomb. I first proposed a special theory of relativity in 1905 in my paper, On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies, Taking Physics in an Electrifying New Direction. By November 1915, I completed the general theory of relativity. I considered this theory the culmination of my life research. I was convinced of the merits of general relativity because it allowed for a more accurate prediction of planetary orbits around the Sun, which fell short in Isaac Newton's theory, and for a more expansive, nuanced explanation of how gravitational forces worked. My assertions were affirmed via observations and measurements by British astronomers Sir Frank Dyson and Sir Arthur Eddington during the 1919 solar eclipse, and thus a global science icon was born. In 1933, I took on a position at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, New Jersey. At the time, the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, were gaining prominence with violent propaganda and vitriol in an impoverished post-World War I Germany. The Nazi Party influenced other scientists to label my work Jewish physics. Jewish citizens were barred from university work and other official jobs, and I was targeted to be killed. Meanwhile, other European scientists also left regions threatened by Germany and immigrated to the U.S., with concern over Nazi strategies to create an atomic weapon. After moving, I never went back to my native land. It was at Princeton that I would spend the rest of my life working on a unified field theory and all-embracing paradigm meant to unify the varied laws of physics. Not long after I began my career at Princeton, I expressed an appreciation for American meritocracy and the opportunities people had for free thought, a stark contrast to my own experiences coming of age. In 1935, I was granted permanent residency in my adopted country, and I became an American citizen 5 years later. During World War II, I worked on Navy-based weapons systems and made big monetary donations to the military by auctioning off manuscripts worth millions. In 1939, me and fellow physicist Leo Szilard wrote to President Franklin D. Roosevelt to alert him of the possibility of a Nazi bomb and to galvanize the United States to create its own nuclear weapons. The U.S. would eventually initiate the Manhattan Project, though I would not take a direct part in its implementation due to my pacifist and socialist affiliations. I was also the recipient of much scrutiny and major distrust from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. After learning of the 1945 bombing of Hiroshima, Japan, I became a major player in efforts to curtail usage of the A-bomb. The following year, me and Szilard founded the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, and in 1947, via an essay for the Atlantic Monthly, I espoused working with the United Nations to maintain nuclear weapons as a deterrent to conflict. In the late 1940s, I became a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP,
seeing the parallels between the treatment of Jews in Germany and African Americans in the United States. I corresponded with scholar activist W.E.B. Du Bois, as well as performing artist Paul Robeson, and campaigned for civil rights, calling racism a disease in a 1946 Lincoln University speech. After World War II, I continued to work on my unified field theory and key aspects of my general theory of relativity, including time travel, wormholes, black holes, and the origins of the universe. However, I felt isolated in my endeavors since the majority of my colleagues had begun focusing their attention on quantum theory. In the last decade of my life, me, who had always seen himself as a loner, withdrew even further from any sort of spotlight, preferring to stay close to Princeton and immerse myself in processing ideas with colleagues. I died on April 18, 1955, at age 76 at the University Medical Center at Princeton. The previous day, while working on a speech to honor Israel's 7th anniversary, I suffered an abdominal aortic aneurysm. I was taken to the hospital for treatment, but I refused surgery, believing that I had lived my life and I was content to accept my fate. I said, I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it is time to go. I will do it elegantly.
I hope that you enjoyed my story and you have learned more about me. Please let us know your favorite historical figure in the comment so we can make the next video about him or her.